This is the Liminalist podcast between Jasun Horsley talking to David Curtis.
What's it like there? Is it cold?
In British Columbia, it's the weather's pretty similar to England. Actually, it's about 8 months of rain and a few months of a cool summery time. At least that's how it's been lately. But actually we have much colder winters. That's one difference.
Are you in the west?
It's on the west coast, yeah.
Right. Well, here it's very grey, and I'm still wearing my greatcoat, big thick greatcoat. So that's how bad it is here.
Right. Cold.
But I'm hardy, you know. I take a 2-hour walk every single day, any kind of weather. So, you know, I'm not impervious, but, you know, I've done a lot of squatting in Wales and, you know, a lot of rough living. And, you know, it doesn't bother me, but I do feel the chill. You know, there's a north wind from Siberia, and it's been around for about 5 years. You know, it just won't go away.
Wow. When were you born then? What year were you born in?
45.
Oh. And you were born in England?
Salford.
Salford, I don't know that place.
Yeah, I was born in Greater Manchester, the borough of Salford, and a district called Pendleton. And have you heard of Pendle Hill?
No.
That's where all the witchcraft was, between Manchester and Lancaster, Pendle Hill.
You mean the witchcraft when it was Diane Fortune and those gang, when they were trying to...
No, we're talking about 17th century, but even today witchcraft is quite prevalent in Manchester area. Yeah. But I moved to Oxford at the age of 2, and then I joined my sister in America at the age of 15 and went to Portsmouth High School in New England.
Mm-hmm.
And my brother-in-law and sister went off to California and more or less abandoned me. I had nowhere to go. So I had to literally ask people if I could live with them. So I lived with a number of families, moved to New York, Poughkeepsie, north of New York on the Hudson, and managed to get through high school and then put myself through college. And, you know, it's quite an interesting journey.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I had my first girlfriend was from Colchester, but I never visited it.
Yeah, it's a backwater here, and I don't like the place. And I came with my friend who's up at the university and studied. He's at the Centre for Psychoanalytic Studies, and I came with him about 20 years ago, and I just stayed on here. Haven't made one friend here, and it's a funny place. But I've been occupied with my work for about 12 years. And more or less sustain that kind of isolation, you know.
Mm-hmm. So that suits you then?
It does really. I've always wanted to get out, you know, go back to Oxford or join my nephew in Brighton. You know, it's quite bohemian there. I'm used to kind of bohemian living, really, but I'm in a council flat. I've never been in a council flat before. I've got a massive front window that I'm looking out now, and half of it's filled with Colchester Castle.
Huh.
And it's about 200, 300 feet away. And I don't know, it's a lovely walk. I feel that nature's on my doorstep.
Mm.
I've got my own library. I haven't used the internet, so I use my own library. And yeah, I'm just centered on my work.
Your writing and your artwork.
Well, I stopped doing art in '95, and I stopped doing my actual research in 2014 and prepared all the books for publication in March. And I've stopped reading, so the only thing I do is listen to a bit of classical music on the radio, and apart from that, I don't do anything.
But you just said you spend your time doing your work, didn't you?
Yeah, that's what sustained me over the years.
Yeah.
In preparing my work, and that's kept me going until March. And now I'm reaching out to you and other people, which is quite difficult because I'm not really a person, that really performs or goes on the stage, that kind of thing.
Yeah. And this is because you would like people to become aware of the work that you've just finished.
Yeah, I've got a lot to say, and I like talking really. I like story, kind of recalling my life and how the the work penetrates the life. But it's just a matter of experiment. If I can get along with you and somebody else, maybe, I'll open up and I'll get used to it. Maybe I will.
And are you making the work available? Is the work that you're referring to what you sent me in the attachment?
Yeah, it's all on Amazon. I published 9 books at once. That's all my work.
Okay.
And that's it.
Wow, that is a lot.
Yeah, that took. I don't know if you've had a glimpse at my Luminary book.
I've definitely had a glimpse at it, but not much more because I could see it.
Yeah, well, it's a Castaneda. It's a real life Castaneda kind of thing. I came here with my friend. Within a year, I met this very old man, and it just. That became the kind of storyline since I've been here. Quite remarkable.
Oh, so it focuses on the later part of your life then?
Oh, yeah. It's from 2000. And what happened was I was living with my friend. He decided to get married. We've been here a year. And within that time, I had this quite strange meeting with the man. And then at that time, I had a stroke. And all these things happened at once. So I kind of got over. The stroke lasted about 7 years. And that was the time I knew the old man for about 5, and he finally died. He was about 82 or so when I met him.
Mm-hmm.
And what was interesting was that I walked with him every day, and he started to teach me the wildflowers down the river, which is about 1.5 miles long. So he lives at the bottom of the hill. He lived at the bottom of the hill on the river. I live at the top of the hill opposite the castle. And we started walking together, and he showed me the wildflowers. And I said to him one day, after I realized that he was, to me, the archetype of the wise old man, and he had never read any books. He wasn't religious. He wasn't, he wasn't really aware of any tradition or anything like that. And I remember going to his house and saying to him that, I told him that I thought he was a typical wise old man. And he kind of smiled at me, and I think I was the first one that ever recognised him as that. And he knew, as soon as I told him the kind of background to that idea, and he knew right away the type he was, but he'd never had anybody recognise him. So it's quite interesting, quite an intimate moment.
And what do you think about the Castaneda books then, since you referred to them?
Yeah, I read them in probably the 80s, and my relationship is only, in the sense of meeting this old man, and extraordinary things happen, but it really is not about altered. There were some altered state things happened in his house, in his garden, some apparitions and so forth. But there was no drugs or no what I would call, altered states but I would consider that the relationship implied altered states, but it was purely natural, so it was a natural one-to-one relationship. And you might say in the margins, all these things were happening, but it didn't affect our relationship, and it didn't really affect the mind to mind. It's a bit like the Sufi idea where you pretty much are at one with the person you're with, the master or whatever, it's just a one-to-one, and that's self to self. So it's a kind of self to self. Whereas my relationship to Krishnamurti, for example, wasn't one-to-one. He was the master and you were the pupil. And the contact I had with him personally resulted in this incredible altered state. And that's how I knew where he was. Very few people knew where he was. And unless you had that state, you didn't know where he was. And he wouldn't allow anybody to know where he was, but I did find out, which is quite interesting, because he thought he was safe in a certain altered state, and I think he for example, his colleague and the person I also met was Professor David Bohm. Have you heard of him? That's right, the wholeness and the implement. Well, I knew them both, so, and I had the understanding that David Bohm didn't have a clue of where Krishnamurti was. And they had all these dialogues, and which were pretty much rubbish, the kind of pseudo-intellectual, scientific, trying to blend, the Tao of physics, that kind of idea. And, I went to his school in Brockwood in Hampshire to stay. I was a guest of the principal. I knew the principal, Dorothy Simmons. I stayed there a week. Krishnamurti was there, etc. So I got into I didn't join the inner circle. I've always avoided inner circles, but I've always been in the ante room. I've always had access, but I didn't want it. And I realized that nobody knew where he was. Nobody actually knew what Krishnamurti was. And I don't know if Castaneda actually knew who Don Juan was. Do you see what I mean?
To some degree, because there's a lot of room for speculation in terms of whether Don Juan was at all, or whether he was a composite,
Yeah.
and so on.
Yeah, but but if you're in TM, do you know where Maharishi is? If you're into non-duality, do you know where Ramana Maharishi is? Do you know where these people are? Do you know where Buddha is? And people don't know where these people are. And if they claim they do, like a Zen, if you're doing Zen and you claim you've had Satori, like Eckhart Tolle and those type of people, Francis Lucille and all these people, well, are they real? Are they in this absolute state? Are they in this transcendental state or not? And how are you going to find out? How are you going to break the spell?
Well, you used the word safe, which I thought was a very interesting choice of words, that Krishnamurti was staying safe within this altered state.
Exactly.
So that sounds more dissociative than transcendental.
Well, all altered states are dissociative. And thought itself is dissociative. Consciousness is dissociative. And I know you're interested in the body, and so am I. And I don't know if you've had a glimpse of the one mind, which is my 3-month experience of Satori, and I'm just using labels. But what I make clear is that there is a Satori which is immanent and at one with the body. So you can be in Satori, like I think the Zen poets, for example, like Basho and Han San, people like that. I've read a book by Suzuki, Recording the Masters, and I've read all the different, one master will say, well, there's no method, there's no meditation, all of this. But really, I've never seen in that particular book any reference to immortality or transcendence. But I think there's an assumption in Buddhism generally that what Buddha achieved was transcendent. But for me, at the moment, I only know something that's immanent. So I'm quite at odds with all these people. And if I have to come across them, I don't know what I'll say, because they're claiming something absolute. And I don't know if that's possible. But from what you can go on what you sense and what you intuit and the language they use. That's the only context you have. And I doubt it. I doubt it very much. I doubt it. And with Krishnamurti, from when I came back from India, I lived next door to Lama Govinda, who wrote the foreword for Evans Went's Book of the Dead. I went to seminars in his house. I didn't take to it. I came back to England, and friends of mine in Banbury, I went to art school in Banbury for a while, and they said, well, we know about this guru, Krishnamurti, would you like to come along? So I went along, and he gave his talks in these big marquees. So he came along, and he went into the tent, and I was standing there, and it just clicked. I just felt pretty much the same as him. And I already had an experience, but I didn't have a context for it. And when he walked in, it just clicked. And when later I had this contact with him, and I felt at one with him when I was standing near him, and we were relating, that was the end of the conference season, and I used to stay in the house and so forth. And I walked down to get the bus to Winchester, got on the bus from Winchester to go to Oxford through the Vale of the White Horse, and something quite well, miraculous happened, right, on the bus. And that was not my state. That wasn't what I was in. I don't know how it happened. I don't know. I know it's related to Krishnamurti. And from that moment on, I knew that what he was using as evidence for himself for this claim that he was in touch with, for example, immensity, benediction, the other, and also the source of creation, and for me it was simply an altered state. It was very miraculous, but it was an altered state. And I didn't tell anybody, and I didn't let anybody. I knew a lot of people from all over the world at Brockwood. I never told anybody. No one came forward and said they, in his close, the close circle, no one was claiming that they understood or that they shared in this thing with Krishnamurti. And I didn't want to rock the boat, and it didn't bother me too much. But when I started recalling and writing and criticizing these types of people, then I had a context. I had a kind of right to do that. But I don't think any followers of Krishnamurti would pay any attention to that.
Light leaks in from the corner of the room. It softens itself against the pale pink walls. Your voice is a chamber of echoes, always keeping me up. You crept into my dreams, ride a roller coaster into the sea of things in between. You are pounding wooden blocks, shaping cylinder tubes, and I believe your presence makes the world brand new. We can take it anyway, but I learned enough to just take it today. It's true that if you run that, you may fall, but if you never try, you'll never try at all. I have written a story on the inside of my eyes. It gets so hard to keep it open all the time. Blink, blink, blink. It makes me think, think. Blink, blink, blink. It makes me think, think. All these songs go back to the room. You trace the scales in musical room. All these words go back to some room, and all these thoughts are only the truth that I believe your presence. I believe your presence. I believe your presence makes the world brand new.
interesting direct parallel with what I'm working on now. I don't know if you're aware, because it's quite recent, but with investigating John DeRuta, this.
Yeah, I did watch a video because I know you put me onto him in that sense. Yeah.
It seems like very, very close to what you're describing. I mean, just the basics in terms of somebody who appears to have accessed some kind of altered state of consciousness and who is able to induce it in others, and therefore give them the sense that he's the source of some great spiritual wisdom.
Right.
But there's a trap in there, and a very profound trap, I think, and whether or not he himself, or in what you're talking about, Krishnamurti, believes that he actually has attained complete and utter enlightenment, or whatever word they might use for it, or whether there's an awareness of manipulating awareness for personal gain. Obviously I can only speculate, but that's a constantly recurring question for me, which sort of centers around a larger question which I'm forever finding myself staring at, which is about enlightenment and the concept and the reality of enlightenment, assuming there is a reality that corresponds with the word, which is the understanding that if such a thing as enlightenment were to exist, then by definition a person would know it when they attained it. But that has to be juxtaposed with the irrefutable evidence that there are countless people who believe that they have attained enlightenment and haven't.
Yeah, I mean, I think you can compare that to the UFO phenomenon. You know, like for me personally, if you read the work of John Lilly at the Center of the Cyclone, and he was a scientist and he was very serious about levels of consciousness and, you know, taking drugs and deprivation and all kinds of things like that. He said that he traveled, you know, in all these astral journeys, but he would not categorically say that any of that was real, other than it was thought, you know, it was ephemeral, it was Maya and so forth and so on. But going back to what you said, I think categorically, and I don't like to say it really, but I think they're lying through their teeth. That's my honest view.
But would you say that about anyone who claimed to be enlightened, or about specifically because you've had the experience with Krishnamurti, as I've had with John, that there's a use that this state is being used in some way that is unethical, or however we're going to put it. You know, it's being used by the ego apparently. Therefore, we can see that it's unreal.
Well, you see, I always said to my friend, you know, Professor Roderick Main, right? I always said to him about Krishnamurti, because we came from a similar background. He's much younger, but he's an Oxford graduate, scholarship boy and all of that. But he was, you know, he had an out of the body at college in Exeter, and you know, he was into Gurdjieff. He spent 2 years out of college and going to Glastonbury and all that kind of thing. And I said, I said more or less speculatively, if you ever wanted to know about Krishnamurti, whether he's telling the truth, read what he said. And, you know, like poetry, you know, like, say, Basho or the Zen poets, I can get right away what they're saying personally. And I don't know if you know the work of Seamus Heaney.
No.
No, right. He wrote a book called Spirit Level and a book called Seeing Things. And he had all these epiphanies and that kind of thing. He was basically a materialist. In other words, you know, he had no experience of transcendence. And he kind of paid homage to the Zen poet Han Shan, whose alias is Cold Mountain. And he just thought they were brilliant. You know, they were absolutely brilliant. But he wasn't saying that they had experienced something transcendent, but that in a certain way, is a kind of transcendence. If you use the word metaphysics, then you can use that in a I suppose it's non-specific, but you can really refer to that language as also being, like the word spiritual can be used by a musician, and a materialist, so to speak. And I said to my friend that, if you did read Krishnamurti, he probably gives himself away. That's what I thought, and I do think that's true. And so what I would say is that in the Tao Te Ching, Lao Tzu, those who know do not tell, those who tell do not know. So when they asked the Buddha, what is nirvana, and he refused to comment. And I think that says a lot.
It's a kind of impossible conundrum at the same time, because even you and I talking, we're hoping to transmit something of our experience, however tenuous or marginal, of the thing that we're talking about. So that thing that those who know don't speak and those who speak don't know, it would seem then that there's nothing to speak about, right, of any value, but I don't feel that that's true either. Like, I think that I know, to be direct, and of course we're running out of time now, as I knew would happen, but I also have a relationship, and I would say it was similar to what you described with this old man. I don't feel that this person is my teacher, much less my master. He doesn't claim to be a master. It's more of a self-to-self relationship of equals, but he does claim to be enlightened, and he does earn a living as an enlightenment whatever. So he fits into the category of what we can probably agree is almost always questionable and distrustworthy. And yet, because I have a personal relationship with him, and I would say it's a friendship, although I can't help but question his choice to be somebody who's talking about things that can't be talked about, and even making a living doing it, I'm not really skeptical about my experience of him, because I have a direct experience, and he just seems to be very present and very unpretentious, and not to be making any claims besides this one claim of being enlightened, that which he would also admit he doesn't know what he means or what it is, but just something major happened to him, and that he's put the name enlightenment on it, and in order, I suppose, to be able to talk about it. And now, to me, that is a trap in and of itself, but at the same time I say it's a conundrum, because what else is he to do if he wants to communicate the experience of something remarkable to others, besides not talk about it at all, if you see what I mean.
Yeah, but can you conceive of yourself being in something, like shunyata, emptiness, without an attachment to the body, and so the nothing to say is that there is nothing to say, there's nothing to record. And I'm saying, if you record that, you give it away. What's the word? You're showing your hand. You're going to betray yourself. If you think of Shakespeare and you think of all the literature in the world, and as you say, the conundrum, but you think how profound philosophy and all of the great thinkers, what are they saying? And what I'm saying is, I can imagine the experience I had in the immanent sense, which still was attached to my brain and body and consciousness and memory and all of that. I can imagine that ending, and I think it might have happened the other night, but I'm not going to talk about it now. But you're not the same. I can imagine you're not the same. I'm not going to say you're not a human being, but you're not the same in the sense that you're not a continuation of your past. You know, it's not the continuity of consciousness has stopped, and you're elsewhere, and do you see what I mean?
I do, and I mean, well, I don't know if I do or not, but I'm not losing the thread. I'm not aware of it, and I mean, so there's something about what you're saying that to talk about the experience of that breaking continuity can be a way to stitch it back together again, and that would be the betrayal, I think. But it seems as though there's also the possibility that talking about it's a paradox. Again, it wouldn't be reporting on the past, as in this happened and now I'm going to talk about it and record it and fix it and therefore make it untrue. It would rather be the continuous expression of that experience. That somehow, I mean, the only way I can reconcile this is that there's a response, that we as living consciousness have a response always to our environment. And so if somebody is questioning in some way, in such a way that it draws from us a response that then communicates this experience, then that brings us back to I don't know if this is making sense, but it brings us back to the thing that we're not really identified with, which is, yes, at a certain point in my life everything ended and I became, whatever it is we're going to call this, and now I'm communicating that to you. For whatever reason, I mean, I'm speaking from the other side of from this side of enlightenment, where I've only glimpsed it, and it's something I'm grasping to understand in order to prepare for it or something. Probably all futile, but I'm drawn to explore it because I feel that it's the purpose of my existence. Not to understand it, but to experience it. And so I can't help but try and understand it with my mind. So then I can see how somebody could have this experience and still come back and talk about it at a level of mind, because that's the way that people are interacting with that person.
Well, when I was in Oxford, I got access through my friend's friend at Christchurch to the bodily and then to some philosophy departments. So I got hold of these two books, I think it was The Science of Logic by Hegel, and Dialectic. And it's, I don't know how many people have actually read the two books, but I love them, and when I read them, it was like cancelling, if you think of logic at a very abstract level, and you're playing off one word against another, like Sartre's being a nothingness. So you're playing off, and playing off, and playing off. And he takes you, let's put it this way, he can fabricate the nothing. Right, through the logic, he can take you, like music, can take you, Bach or whatever, they can take you to the numinous, and then it's like Satori, you get a glimpse through that numinous, the cloud of unknowing, right? So you see it, but like parapsychology, and if you've had a lot of experience of those kind of phenomena, of UFOs, which I have, then after you've had it and you've seen it 20 feet away, did you see it? To have that question, did you see that? And you saw it, you actually saw it like a real object. But in your mind, and what's interesting is, I know it's related to what I've heard you talk about and other people in conspiracy theory. I was saying last night to my friend, and I say my friend, he's my only friend, but I was saying to him about, this thing of child abuse and all these kind of things. And he kind of stared at me. He won't go there. And he just stares at me. And I said, well, I can imagine being a child with a sense of memory of abuse, possibly, the family member. And because in my family, you're not supposed to do that, that was kind of implanted, you're not supposed to do that. Because of that command, even if it happened, that command could cancel out the memory. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, I agree with that.
It's not a fear. It's a kind of fear of memory. It's a fear of remembering it.
Yeah, it's not safe to remember.
Yeah, that kind of thing. Yeah. Well, I'm saying that you can have experiences like epiphany, and the skeptics come along and they can put doubt into your mind. They can undermine that level of awareness. They can undermine. And they're doing a very good job at it, So it works. And I'm saying that if you, like what Hegel did for me and what Basho and the Zen poets do also, they're alluding to something, they kind of take you there, and maybe they really do take you there, maybe the music actually does take you there. To the humanness, to the cloud of unknowing, and you see it, and because it's nothing, it's really nothing. Then, what does that? How does memory deal with that? Or it's something so taboo and censored in the culture, like the UFO or abuse or something, and you're not, do you see the memory? And what happens with the betrayal is, with Krishnamurti, he's such a fool, but he doesn't know there are very clever people, the very people he censors of his talks. Oh, don't mention philosophy, don't mention Buddhism, I don't want to contextualize, just don't mention it. But, he's given himself away.
Mm-hmm.
And so, if you see something, as I say, if you see the nothing, the void, now, if you see that, then you won't record it, will you? Right? You won't record it. So, if you're such a fool, if you're seen to be such a fool, or you feel the conditioning tells you you're such a fool, and you keep it to yourself, like Lao Tzu, when he was stopped when he was leaving the province, and the keeper of the past said, please write down, so-and-so, and those who know do not, right? Because there is nothing to tell, because the memory is obsolete at that point. So if you go around telling people that it's the power of the now, which makes me laugh, but if you go around telling people you've been to the source of creation and stuff like that, to me personally, it's not only absurd, and the Jungian inflation, the inflation of the manner personality, like you could say Don Juan maybe appeared to Castaneda as like an inflated manner personality. But why should Don Juan bother to reveal his true self? Because there is nothing to reveal. And you've got to relate to people, and you play the Leela, don't you? You have to dance, and you have to be the fool, and you have to compose your music. What else? I mean, we're here, we're cultural beings, and we have to do it. We have to. I mean, from the time of 22, when I had this experience, I didn't have the confidence, I didn't have the integrity, I didn't have the individuality, and I met all these people. I explored all these different levels. I lived in the same house as Celia Green for a year, a bit of a monster, and all I could do was learn.
Venus in twilight, she rings like a bell. Hot blue like moonbeams I'll use for my spell. Gesture with one finger, two fingers, three. Venus in twilight, let true love guide you to me. I peel back the bar, wrap it up tight with a charm for the dark. Ponder the limbs like all good lovers do. Venus in twilight, let true love guide me to you. Let it guide me to you. Darling, quit now the night. Venus in twilight, my true love, seek now the light. Oh my darling, seek now the light. Oh my darling, seek now the light.
Yeah, I just listened to the last part so I would remember where we left off. And you were talking about when you were 22 and all you could do was learn.
Learn?
Yeah, that's what you said. There was nothing for you to do but learn.
That's right, yeah. That's when I left my marriage. I was married to an Italian-American, and I was in my last year of university, State University of New York, Stony Brook, Long Island, and I moved back to Poughkeepsie, and I had this profound experience, but it wasn't like an experience as an isolated event. It was like a takeover, you know, my whole consciousness changed.
Mm.
And that was in coincidence with my beginning to meet people that were alternative. And I'd never heard of anything alternative. I'd never heard of counterculture. I wasn't aware of any of that whatsoever. But curiously enough, before I left university, the Jimi Hendrix Experience came onto the campus. It was quite a radical kind of, it was the Berkeley of the East at the time. And as I said, I didn't know about Berkeley or anything like that. So there's a Jimi Hendrix Experience, and I notice on campus people painting their faces and such. And when I walked in to listen to Jimi Hendrix, I was more into classical, but somehow I went along, and this group were playing, and it was just this random playing, and it went on for maybe an hour, and I found out much later it was a soft machine. Do you know that? Yeah.
No, but I guess they took their name from William Burroughs. Huh?
Oh, right. I see. I see. Yeah. And so I go back to Poughkeepsie, and I think there's something wrong with my brain because, you know, if the way I was brought up and the people I live with, you know, if anything went wrong, it was your body, you know, something wrong with your brain or something. So I happened to meet someone, and his father was a Czech psychiatrist. So I go to the house and have a chat. And he said, oh, it sounds like you've got anxiety neurosis. Well, of course, I left my marriage. I left university prematurely, came back to my hometown, and of course I was at a loose end. And I thought that was rather bogus, what he said. And so I kind of entered a kind of Gothic hinterland, I call it. Maybe you'll call it the liminal. But, you know, I really did visually see the world around me differently. It wasn't, as I say, a one-off experience. It was actually a total change. And
when was it exactly?
Well, 22, 23, probably 23, which of course is William Burroughs' number, isn't it? And Crowley's number.
Well, I was wondering if you knew the date, because if you were 22, that would be 1967, which was the year I was born. Right.
Yeah. And yeah, so 23 is, I remember I read quite a bit of Crowley because, yeah, anyway, I had one of my earliest motifs in my kind of life story, one of the earliest, you might say, symbols that I became interested in was the scarab beetle.
Mm-hmm.
And I was reading Crowley, and I think the book has the number 23 in it. I think it's 1923. I think it's to do with 1923. I think he's in Cairo, and it's autobiographical, just sketches, and he's sitting in bed, and his scarab crawls up his body or something like that. So I was quite interested.
Well, Jung had a big synchronicitous experience with the scarab. Yeah.
That's right. Yeah, he had the big one. Yeah, that was his. He always used that as a.
I guess we should say claim to, because at this point I'm skeptical about all of those guys. So.
Yeah, yeah. So anyway, I just found myself doing let's say I was creative at that time. I was doing, I took a couple of courses of art, but I was already drawing before that, making sculpture. And so I felt creative. So when I had my passport, when I came back to England for a while in the age of 21, I didn't know what to put on the passport. So I said artist. So obviously that was my kind of label. You know, I just felt I was a creative person. So I'm in Poughkeepsie. I get this room, which is a kind of attic room. It's got a kind of dome roof. It's only about 7 feet tall, high. And so I'm living there, and I found myself going out, say, at 5:30 in the morning and going down to a diner in the kind of rough part of town. And a kind of Hopper, is it Hopper, the artist?
I think it rings a bell. Edward Hopper, is it?
Yeah, Edward Hopper. He does these night scenes in bars and diners.
Mm.
So I go to this diner and I get kind of mesmerized by the people in it, and these people kind of going to work, you know, at that time in the morning and just whatever they're doing. And another place I went to was this kind of cabin, which was in a leafy residential area, because it was an IBM town, so it was quite prestigious, you know. But this was near the main gate to Vassar College. Have you heard of Vassar College?
I don't think so. Maybe.
That was the elite ladies' college, you know, Jacqueline Kennedy and such.
All right. Okay.
And so, you know, it was anyway. When I was in high school, I lived with this family, and the man was, in my last year in high school, he was an inventor for IBM. And I think did I tell you that I think I mentioned it to you on the email or something, that he got me a job after I left high school in the IBM, and we were working on the Apollo rocket.
You did mention that. It seemed like it needed some background, because it was quite a surprising thing to be involved in.
Yeah, well, it was a very simple job. You just wore a white coat, you were in a dust-free area, and you had a microscope, and all it was looking down and kind of soldering these modules. That's really the kind of thing it was.
Oh.
But anyway, the lady of the house, she was the secretary of the treasurer of Vassar College, and she got me a job in the library, kind of assisting the bibliographer. So that, anyway, I'm connected to that. So I just felt drawn to do things that I would never have done before, with a kind of freedom. You know, it's almost like not being inhibited and kind of doing what I wanted to do within the law, but certainly breaking the taboos of my kind of very straight existence before that.
Mm-hmm. This was before your breakthrough experience.
No, this was it. This is the kind of things I was doing.
Okay, so but you made it sound like you had an actual moment in which your consciousness shifted, and so you had some inner shift occurring.
Yes, as I say, it wasn't a kind of isolated experience. You know, it wasn't like an awakening. It was just as if you want to put it in Jungian terms, the unconscious took over.
Mm.
And the relevance of my life around me, my identity as a married person, my identity as a student, my identity, there was, you could say I was a kind of Mishkin-like person in Dostoevsky. Do you know him?
Yeah, I do. Yeah, I used to have an email account, Prince Mishkin.
The idiot. Yeah, well, anyway, that kind of loss of identity, I think I had that as a child and probably had it right the way through. So I felt at home in that kind of condition. And
so you're saying it was a gradual process then, over a period of months, that you began to...
Yeah,
Yeah.
Yes, you know, as I say, I began to make decisions and kind of disidentifying, and drifted into this state. Just kind of drifted into this state, and that lasted for about a year. And I seem to have come out of it. And by that time, I had moved to Newport near Woodstock, pretty much near Woodstock. And you know, Woodstock it's a settlement for the beatniks and things from the 30s, 40s, 50s in Greenwich Village.
Mm-hmm.
And I lived near there, and I tried to do an art course at Newport State. That didn't work after a few weeks. I found it boring. And I seemed to then meet all these people in the counterculture, and that became my lifestyle. So I just, from that moment on, probably right until now, is that, you know, I've skirted around society. I've never been part of society or the rat race. And, you know, I just took to it like a fish to water, you know.
So who are some of the people that you encountered in the counterculture then? Well,
I think it was while I was in Poughkeepsie at that time, during that period, that year when I was in this kind of liminal state, a friend of mine, the son of the IBM person in high school, he had gone off to Vietnam, and he'd come back and bought a Corvette, you know, like a Jaguar, like Corvette. He said, well, let's go out to see Leary, you know, and I didn't know who Timothy Leary was. And evidently, in the local Poughkeepsie paper, the police had gone out there to this estate in a place called Millbrook, and, you know, he had thrown flowers at these policemen, and that was the picture in the paper. But I didn't know who Leary was. I didn't really know much. So we kind of drove out there and just pulled into this big estate. And when we came to the main house, it was like painted. So you had these faces and psychedelic stuff all over the building. So we drive up to the entrance, and these people are sitting around. I mean, I didn't know about LSD or anything, but they were just sitting around this kind of state, you know, kind of slightly trance-like. And, you know, I suppose my friend said, is Timothy Leary about? And they said, oh, he's over there. And he was ploughing a field. You know, he had this kind of rotor mower or something, like digging up the soil. So he came over and we spent some time talking to him, and I can't remember the conversation. But I know that prior to that, Arthur Koestler had been there. I found that later, and taken LSD, and had a bad trip. But it's interesting that well, anyway, Koestler, he himself and this woman assistant, much younger than him, when he got old and was dying, he took a death pill, you know.
What kind of death pill?
I don't know. He had this pill from, is it Exit or something? I don't know what the suicidal pact or something. And his young assistant decided to do it with him. So in this flat in London, they just took the pill.
Wow. Yeah.
But Arthur Koestler actually was in league with Alistair Hardy in Oxford, and he ran the religious experience unit in Manchester College down Holywell Road, where the Holywell Music Room is. And when eventually I went back to Oxford, probably in this was probably the mid 1970s, I actually went along and knocked on the door, and the director came out, and we went upstairs, had a chat, and he invited me to these series of seminars. They're really PhD seminars with like invited guests, but somehow he thought I'd fit in there. And later on, Arthur Koestler, the Arthur Koestler Chair was set up at Edinburgh University. It was the first chair of parapsychology in Britain.
Interesting. Have you read any of Prisoner Infinity, which I've serialized at the blog?
I haven't.
And have you read any of Occult Yorkshire, about my background and the Fabians? And
Well, I've heard a lot of, I mean, I don't read books, unfortunately. I don't read them. But no, I've heard a lot of your podcasts and, and seen a lot of your other videos. So I feel... Do you want to say something?
Well, it's always interesting experience. I mean, I want to hear about all your experiences and the people that you've met and the connections and all that, but I also can't help but be curious in terms of how you perceive it now, because when you're talking about these people, I'm just thinking intelligence operatives, social engineering, deep long-term agenda to control society. I'm not thinking, wow, he met Timothy Leary, right? So, but so when you're talking about Crowley, I'm thinking child abuse, and it's like I'm aware of the context for me that all of this information already has. It doesn't mean it's the whole context or even the right one, but it is the context for me at this time anyway. But I'm not necessarily aware of what context that you're talking about it within. So I mean, and I do want to hear about your different encounters, but I'm also curious about how you perceive them talking to me, in terms of whether you feel that you really brushed elbows with intelligence operatives and with large social engineering programs involved with spiritual groups and parapsychology and all the rest, or whether you have a very different perspective. I don't know, because we've only just started speaking.
Yeah, well, how I see things is that I don't think I've been taken in by anything, but I have had a history of UFOs, and I probably had an abduction at 4 years old. So, and I'm pretty sure that I've had these long-term memories, which now I've only really found out about the UFO conspiracy theory, all of that, in the last 2 years. I read a couple of books, Strieber and Jacobs, and it was a rather pessimistic or confused agenda. So I know a lot about conspiracy theory and what you're talking about. But, it's interesting. I was talking to my friend, Roderick Main, he's the Jungian scholar, and he comes over every couple of months. He lives down the road, really, but we have a 4-hour discussion. And, last time he was here, which was a few 3 or 4 nights ago, and I was saying about you and Savile and all that kind of stuff, and he kind of stares at me. He doesn't want to say anything. He's not interested. He's from Rochdale, and there was a lot of business in Rochdale. And I said about a memory. I think did we talk about it last time, where kind of sexual, there was a kind of this long-term memory, or that possibly I'd been abused, but I would never have thought about it in any real way if I wasn't exposed to all this material lately. At 70 years old. So then I started to see other things within the UFO context, abduction as a 4-year-old, and I could see these screen memories, and I really thought they were real memories. And I can see that they're very ambiguous, but I took them to be genuine memories of being in Portsmouth when I first went to America at 15. And did I say last time about living at the Pease, working at the Pease Air Force Base?
No, you didn't.
No, well, I joined my sister. She's married to an ex-Air Force person. We're living in the housing project near the base. It's Pease Air Force Base. I go to the local high school. He gets me a job in the base, in the officers' club, just weekends cleaning, washing glasses and things. And this was the fall of 61. So, of course, it's not. When I had my first UFO experience in Oxford in 76, in the house of T.E. Lawrence, it was actually, the Lawrence of Arabia. I lived in his house in North Oxford, and above my window was the blue plaque of Lawrence of Arabia. And so I had my UFO experience there. So I probably came across the Betty and Barney Hill episode in the late 80s while I was living in Soho, and I started to get involved in reading Adamski and things like that. So I'm, the fall of 61, I find out that Betty and Barney Hill were being investigated in the Pease Air Force Base.
Wow.
Right, and they had taken a journey from Niagara Falls, New York, I think it is, through Canada, and came down through New Hampshire, through the White Mountains, this mountain range, and they had began the journey in Colebrook. So my brother-in-law, their abduction case, I think was the first celebrated case in John Fuller's book, I think, Interrupted Journey, 65, I think, 67. And anyway, he decides to take me up to Vermont through the White Mountains. So we actually take the very route that Betty and Barney, and we end up in Colebrook. And I end up living near Canada in Colebrook, near Colebrook. So it's very weird. Now, as I said to you about screen memories, so it's only recently I connected the experience of my 4 years old. It's only recently, through all this data, that I finally broke through, and I realized that probably was an abduction.
That's the end of the first part of the conversation with David Curtis. You can listen to part 2 in a few days at horticulture.com/liminalist. I'd like to thank my regular donators this month, Holly, Mark, Kelvin and Timu, and generous one-off donators, Brian and Andy.